Hey there, Internet. Welcome to the Hard On Gear channel, where I discuss and review my used and abused knives and gear. I made my first knife trade. This was actually done about probably a month and a half, 2 months ago at least. Back when I first left for basic training, I got a message from East Coast Kid Tack on Instagram, guy that I've kind of kept in touch with since I started this whole knife thing with Instagram and YouTube. He threw the offer out to trade for one of my knives that I kind of talk about in kind of a negative light sometimes. It's a knife that I pretty much carry all the time, but it's not something I really use. It's just because it's light, it looks kind of sweet, it's sort of a practical knife, but again, too small for me, and I've always kind of got something to say about it. And that knife is the first knife that I have traded from my collection, and that is the Osborne 940-2 from Benchmade. Now, I'm a big fan of that knife, and it has blown me away how much I like it for how small it is. But I don't actually carry it as a primary user, ever. I just liked having a small backup knife, and that was small and light enough that it served well as a backup knife with a fairly long blade for its size. But when East Coast Kid Tack brought up the idea of trading that for two of his knives, being either the Spyderco Delica, the Benchmade Griptilian in 154 cm, the Delica being in VG10. And while I know in a lot of people's eyes, and technically speaking, the two steels that I just mentioned aren't premium quality, they're certainly not like M390 204P, but even S30V and like LC200N are pretty fancy by comparison. But I've never tried VG10, I've never tried 154 cm, and they're extremely popular steels from especially the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years that I've just never got my hands on. So good to experience the edge retention and see how they sharpen and all that just from my own context within the knife world. And two knives that I haven't tried out yet that are extremely popular being the Delica and the Griptilian. The other knife he offered up was the original 940 Osborne knife from Benchmade, which has got the aluminum scales and I believe still S30V. But I decided, in case you didn't gather from the amount of detail I went into with the first two knives, I went with the Griptilian and the Delica, traded that for my Osborne 940-2. Now the 940-2 I had used fairly consistently as like a steak knife, so it had seen a lot of time on ceramic plates, and I'd had to touch it up quite a few times. It's had a couple of good, like decent sharpens, but it's in pretty good shape. These two are a little bit more worn in, but still not at all worse for wear, still in very good quality. And the Delica, not quite a flicky, fidgety knife, and it's pretty small. My hands get used to, but can I? No, not quite. But very sturdy little sub 3-inch blade, I want to say. Pretty tiny, compact, slip it in the pocket and forget about it type of knife. One of the most popular compact little knives that you're going to find. Not something I ever would have seen myself purchasing, but when I thought about the trade, if I'm going to get rid of my tiny backup knife, I wanted to replace it with a tiny backup knife. And while doing that, also getting to try one of the most popular knives out that I haven't tried yet in the Delica, and one of the most popular blade steels in the budget mid-range area of $100-150, you'll find a lot of VG10. Above the $150 mark, if it's got VG10, you're probably overpaying for it, if not for $100-120. VG10, I believe, is supposed to be the same area of performance as like 420HC, like your Sandvik steels, in that kind of ballpark. I'm not sure the edge retention and corrosive resistance, all that stuff is going to be a little bit variable between the steels, but again, in that same ballpark, whereas S30V, S35VN are a little bit better, and then you get into your like, crew wares and your, geez, I'm blanking on it, Maximate, some of the fancier stuff that's out there now. Benchmade Griptilian, one of the more popular Benchmade models out there, one that's been recommended to me a bunch of times and that I've mentioned in previous lists, like, top 10 folding knives I plan on getting in the future, those type of videos. The Griptilian's been on that list. The 154 cm is a super popular steel. It's what all of the baseline models for Benchmade and a few other big knife companies used to be in before making the move to S30V. But 154 cm is, I think, Metal Complex's overall favorite steel. The guy uses a lot of premium stuff, but apparently it's just about as well-rounded of a steel as you can get while having edge retention that's getting up there to the same area as S30V and S35VM, but not quite that good. This is the sheep's foot version with the, I don't want to call it spider hole or round hole, but it's got a roundish, a hole that is round that is used for deployment. It doesn't have the same snap as a Spyderco knife, Now the Delica there isn't a great example because it's not the most flicky, fidgety knife in the world. But if you look at something like the Paramilitary 2, that hole, you don't need to put much pressure on that for that to go. Same thing with the Spidey Flick. I missed it there, but it snaps open pretty good. That's a hard thing to miss once you get used to deploying off the Spidey hole. Now the Griptilian, a little bit smaller hole, not as pronounced. The Manix 2 has got a huge hole, and it's, sounds funny, it's got a huge Spidey hole, and it's really easy to hit and really hard to miss. So long as you go and bring your thumb to the side, you're gonna connect with that hole pretty much every time, and should snap open on you fairly easily. This takes a little bit of getting used to because you just slide right over that if you're expecting it to catch like a Spidey hole or a round hole TM from Spyderco. But the reverse flick isn't too bad. Still not as smooth yet as I'd like it to be. It's coming along. Like any time you get a new knife, you got to figure out the specific little nuances of that knife and the locking system, and the ergonomics and everything tend to feel a bit different, but still performs pretty well. Axis lock, smooth as ever. Not as smooth as like my the Super Freak, which is just, what a wicked execution by Benchmade. This thing, having this for the last several months and just non-stop carrying this and fidgeting with it has made this not seem as cool to me right now, because the extra $100, it might have went into the smoothness and the operation of this knife, because it's just phenomenal. It is so slick, and the Griptilian is just a little bit behind. But cheaper knife, probably about $100-150 cheaper, being that this is the older knife steel as well and not the S30V. But nothing wrong with it. It just, by comparison to the M4 Freak, ooh, that's a 9.5 out of 10. That's like a, yeah, 6. Give you an idea where my head's at right now. But nonetheless, compared to most knives out there that I've handled, this is much better fitting in the hand, much more of a work purpose behind it. As far as like when they were making this knife, without a doubt, they were trying to come up with something that you could hang on to all day, do a lot of hard cutting tasks, and not be too worse for wear afterwards. Again, probably be better off even with this, because that M4 Freak is just so well built. But compared to something like, I'll even use the Rat Model 1 for an example, built well, ergonomics are decent, doesn't fit the hand nearly as well, and I feel like eventually maybe you get a little bit of a hand cramp using that for a long period of time, whereas the Griptilian is built to fill the palm of your hand quite nicely, and it just feels a little bit more at home. Not bad, but you know I'm not a huge fan of the Rat knives, mostly because they're just too damn vanilla. Jump into some size comparisons. Why don't we just keep these kind of over here, and let's pull out, well, hey, while they're here, the Super Freak from Benchmade, and why don't we look at the Cold Steel Recon 1. So that's a beast. Recon 1 comes out to just under 9 inches in full length, so that'll give you an idea. It should be about 8 inches or so for the Griptilian, and a little bit more than that, maybe 8 and change for the Super Freak. But yeah, Griptilian's not that big of a knife, but it's definitely a full-size EDC folder. Probably damn close in size, actually, to the Manix 2 from Spyderco. Yeah, so almost identical. The Manix 2 coming to about 8 inches, I think, in total length. And very similar dimensions, actually. I think these would be a very good comparison video to do once I get more time in with the Griptilian. I think Metal Complex actually has a really good comparison video between these two. Very similar in a lot of ways, especially that one with the spider hole in the sheep's foot blade. Axis lock versus the compression lock, all that stuff. I did do a comparison video between the Manix 2 and the Benchmade 940-2 actually. So that was a video I'd wanted to do for a while because I carried both of those knives for the better part of a year, more than almost anything else I had. So check that one out if you want to, and then eventually look out for the comparison between these two. As well as, I'm sure, a comparison between the Super Freak and the Griptilian, which I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think I know which of the two is going to win that game. Okay, let's take those out of there, and I'm going to put that next to the Delica, and we'll bring out a couple of Spydercos. How about the Paramilitary 2, the Pacific Salt 2, and it looks like they're all Spydercos because of that little hole we got going on there with that Benchmade. A little bit different still. Put that Delica over there. And just see next to the paramilitary 2. Paramilitary 2 makes it look a little bit small, but very similar. 2 very popular EDC folding knives in that mid-range price and size. Okay, let's take the Griptilian out there for a minute and just look at the Spyderco's. Man, that is definitely not, there we go, a fidgety knife, the Delica. At least not this one right now. I could loosen up the tension in that a little bit if I wanted to, but it's a knife, and this is definitely just a nice little utility knife. It's not meant to be a fidgety tool. Let's get the Manix 2 out there as well, and bring the Pacific Salt 2 out to full extension, and that's a big old freaking knife. But as you can see, the smaller version, the Delica, and the larger versions, the Endura and the Pacific Salt, the Salt line is just basically the Endura with waterproof capabilities. So LC200N steel and no steel liners and nothing really on this blade or in this knife that's going to rust. Check out the color too. Like, I mean, you can only get this LC200N version in the lime green right now, but the blue and green, we got a little bit of color. Hey, we got the orange with the Wrap Model 1. Little bit of color coming into the hog world. Let's bring that Wrap Model 1 and Model 2 out. And just put those next to the Delica. So we can see the Wrap Model 2 and Delica almost identical in size and blade length and handle length. So there's your real good size comparison if you want it. Let's look at a couple other smaller knives too, now that I think about it. So there's the Cold Steel Tough Light, a little smaller than the Delica by most dimensions. How about the QSB Penguin? QSB Penguin is a little bit bigger than the Delica, but again, right in that same world as the Wrap Model 2. So there you go. I guess, geez, how about a couple fixed blades? I always feel the need to take a couple of fixed blades out. Couple of popular ones like the Izula number 2, which, hey, look at that, almost the same size. How about the Bradford Guardian 3? Another comparison video for those 2 knives, the Guardian 3 and Izula 2, if you're curious as to which one I think is the better knife, or if you just want some ideas as to which one you might like better, feel free to check that comparison video out. But geez, right around the same exact size if you're looking for a good size comparison for an EDC fixed blade. Your Delica, right around the size of an Izula 2, or even closer to the size of the Bradford Guardian 3. But hey, yeah, thanks East Coast Kid Tack for making that trade. Appreciate that. First one that I've done. I was a little bit hesitant at first, only because I get so attached to my knives, but making that trade got me 2 knives that I've been looking to try out, and one in particular that I figured would fill that void of the 940-2 as far as a small backup knife. Because this thing here can't weigh more than maybe 2 ounces, and it's about the same, it's smaller actually than the 940-2. So I switched the pot clip around on these already, so I've got the left-handed side ready to go. Carried the Delica around me a little bit with sweatpants, and maybe I bring these back with me to training when I go. I'm just off on leave right now for a few days, but I'll be bringing a bunch of these knives back with me. I'll do some comparisons, and I'll probably get to carry some of them in the field, or at least when I'm walking around in civvies on my time off. For now, I guess check out, say, those other comparison videos if you haven't. There's either an unboxing or review for pretty much everything on the table here right now. So feel free to take a look at those. Like the video if you liked the video. Feel free to subscribe away if you haven't subscribed yet. And that's it for this one. So see you next time. This is the Hard On Gear channel signing off.